Hello and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. We are coming to you live from the PMI 2015 Global Congress in Orlando, Florida. Disney World is here. We are in the exhibit hall and maybe you can hear it in the background. The exhibitors are starting to take down the tables. With me is Dr. David Hillson. Good afternoon, David.
Hello, Cornelius. Nice to be with you again.
Thank you. It seems like we're doing one of these every Congress.
Well, I've got lots of things to say, and you want to hear about them, so I'm very pleased about that.
Well, one thing I really want to hear you talk about is future trends. What do you see ahead of us for project managers?
I'm worried about a future trend. Because in a number of professional associations and in a number of publications and journals, I see an increasing emphasis on the project manager taking a business role or a strategic perspective and lifting their gaze above the project and concentrating on business value and managing senior stakeholders and creating value for the organization. And what worries me is that this is not the business of managing projects. This is the role of the project sponsor, the role of the organization. Managing projects is a tough call, and we need people who are project managers to focus on delivering deliverables, to creating the ability to generate benefits and value through the outcomes of our projects. And it does just worry me that organizations are encouraging their project managers to lift their sights, and we lose focus on the actual management of projects.
Interesting. That is an interesting counterpoint to everything that PMI seems to be doing at this point.
Oh dear, I'm a PMI fellow, so I ought to be.
I know. No, with the talent triangle, the focus is really understanding business, understanding leadership. Lift yourself up, become more than a mere, quote unquote, project manager. And you're saying we might be leaving a void down there. Absolutely. Where projects actually get managed.
How condescending to talk about a mere project manager.
Yes, I know.
We are the people who change the world. And the other thing is, how many roles are there for project sponsors and business thinkers and strategists? Not very many. How many projects are there that need effective and competent project managers? Millions. So if we encourage every project manager to be a strategic business thinker, they're all going to be aspiring out of the space where we actually have a role to perform. And we'll end up with everybody wanting to be a business manager and nobody wanting to manage projects. So it is a trend. I do see PMI and other organizations going that way, and it worries me.
All right, and I guess that is going to be a discussion for another time, because I think there is a lot of value and discussion in that point. But now to your paper. It is titled Weight Loss for Risky Projects. I know why you're interested in risk. You're known as the risk doctor, but why weight loss? Why this particular focus?
Well, the doctor concept allows us to use the medical metaphor, an analogy, a picture of something that's medical to help us understand something related to the world of risk, and in this case, risk in projects. And so what I've been doing recently is thinking about common risk ailments, using medical pictures, things like depression, things like blindness, things like short-sightedness, for example, which give us a clue into some of the particular problems people have with managing risk in projects. And so one of those common risk ailments that I've been discussing in this paper is the question of risk obesity. And risk obesity, I think, is a common problem. We'll talk about what it is, I'm sure, in a moment. But the way to tackle obesity, there are two ways. One is to lose weight, and the other is to change your risk-taking habits. And so the title, Weight Loss for Risky Projects, is saying that a project that takes on too much risk, we could describe that as risk obese, and so what we need to do is to lose weight to reduce our risk exposure to a manageable level to give our project a better chance to succeed.
All right, and at this point I think it's a good moment when we go straight to the end of your paper where you have a disclaimer and you say that the use of physical obesity as a metaphor in this paper is intended to be illustrative only and is in no way meant to deny the reality of the genuine condition or to belittle or undermine the challenges faced by those who suffer from it. And we also want to get that across here
that's really
quite clearly. So what then is this metaphor of risk obesity?
So where obesity is an accumulation of excess body fat, risk obesity is an accumulation of excess risk. Where obesity says if we take on too much body fat, either through excessive food intake or insufficient exercise, or possibly through genetic predisposition, some genetic factors, it can be bad for our general health and ultimately could be terminal. It can shorten your life expectancy. The same is true with a project. If it takes on too much risk, more risk than it can handle, through either taking on too much risk or not managing it effectively, it can open you to other problems and could ultimately be terminal, fatal for the project, because we have so much risk that in the end the project can't survive.
What other problems would you see that are at the top of your mind?
For a risk-obese project?
Yes, for a risk-obese project.
So for an obese person, we're talking about heart attack, coronary heart disease, we're talking about type 2 diabetes, and so on, osteoporosis. For a project that's taking on too much risk, there's a number of things that it can lead you to. So one of them we might think about being inflexible. Again, that has a kind of a physical analogy as well. So if something new comes along, the situation of your project changes, either a change in the scope or a change in the project context or the change in somewhere in the team. If we're already overburdened with so much risk that we're trying to manage already and something changes in the environment or within the project, then we can't respond to that quickly enough and it very quickly spirals out of control. Mm-hmm. So excess risk stops us responding to new risk. It makes it very hard for us to be flexible and resilient when things change, as they always do on projects.
What are the symptoms of risk obesity?
Well, I think there are a number, and clearly we don't want to go into them all as a kind of list just now. But the first would be, as I just said, if new risks come along, we're unable to handle them because we're already got too much risk to cope with in the system as we are now. Some new risk comes along and we find we just can't think about that now. And of course, if you don't think about risks, then they turn into problems or we miss opportunities. So we find that our project team is in crisis mode. They're firefighting and things are going wrong and they fall out of control. And when that happens, then we have more problems that we should have had. And then we start delivering late. We start cutting corners. The team gets very stressed, they get very demotivated, we make poor decisions because we're rushing to meet the deadlines under risky conditions. So the symptoms are many, but they arise from having more risk already in the system that stops us handling anything new, and then we get stressed about it.
Mm-hmm. In your paper, you also show a probability impact matrix with green areas, yellow areas, and red areas where risk can fall. And here's a quote. One of the problems in deciding whether we have too much risk is not knowing how to define what is red in the probability impact matrix.
Yes, the issue here is that with obesity, you might think it's easy to decide if a person is obese. You look at them and you just make a physical judgment and you say this person is carrying too much weight. The truth is different. So physical obesity has a number of ways of being measured, and ultimately we measure it by saying the body mass index is greater than 30, as defined by the World Health Organization. What measures do we have for risk? If you say this is a risk-obese project because it's carrying too much risk, well, what is too much risk?
Yes.
Well, I'll just look at the project and it looks like it's risky. Okay, how do you do that? Well, we have a PI matrix.
Yes.
And the probability impact matrix has red, yellow, green zones. So there are too many risks in the red area, too much risk. Fine. 2 questions. How do you know what's in the red area and how do you know how many are too many?
Yeah, and how can you really define which area is red?
Exactly.
You can make it bigger or smaller.
Bigger or smaller. So in theory, the concept is that the red area represents our risk appetite. How much risk are we prepared to take on this project? So let's just remind ourselves what red is for. On the threat side, a red threat is the worst threat. It has a high probability of occurring. It's really painful if it happens. We must deal with those. They are unacceptable. They're intolerable, above the risk threshold. On the opportunity side, a red opportunity has a high chance of happening and it's really positive, a big positive impact. So it's a must-have opportunity. So the red zone has the worst threats and the best opportunities. And that needs to be defined to reflect the overall risk appetite of the organization. And that in turn should be defined by the project sponsor in our business case, project charter, or at least the risk management plan.
Mm. What does risk obesity look like in action?
Well, I think it is those projects which are inflexible, that are finding it very difficult to respond. And we have a number of sort of case studies, cases in point the major sort of disaster projects that we know about. I mentioned in my presentation the Big Dig, for example, in Boston, which is many, many times over budget and over schedule. And there are lots of similar projects. Every country, every industry will point to its monster project, which has run out of control. Because, and when they do the post-project analysis and diagnose the root causes of failure, every time one of the root causes is uncontrolled risk, that we've taken on more risk than the project or the organization was able to handle. And so one of the key reasons that projects fail is because we're taking more risk than we can cope. And we might say that is a risk-obese project. And certainly more risk-obese projects fail than projects which have a tolerable level of risk, in the same way that more people who are physically obese will die than people who are physically fit.
All right, and one unexpected risk that we see happening right here around us is people are starting to take down the tables right in our area. So it may have to happen that we end early, go outside and continue in a more quiet area when they really start rattling the chairs here.
I'll let you make that decision.
All right, as soon as it moves into the red area. Mm-hmm. How do we address risk obesity?
Well, if we continue with the physical analogy, if you are overweight, then you have a short-term strategy, which would be to go on a diet. Weight loss for risky projects, right?
Right.
So we could have a short-term approach, which says we need to reduce the risk exposure of the project. But you will probably also know, although, Cornelius, you're always super slim and super trim, and I don't know if that's been your condition.
It's genetic.
Well, lucky you. I'm not. So I occasionally, my weight goes up. When I've been to congresses, I go out for dinners and so on. And then I'm more heavy than I want to be, so I go on a diet and I lose weight, and that's good. I get below my target weight, and then I relax. And then I start eating normally, and you know what happens?
Yes.
I get heavy again. Exactly. So you need short-term solutions to treat the immediate problem, to reduce your level of risk exposure. But you also need a long-term solution, which is to change your risk-taking habits. So for me, if I eat too much, then I diet, and I bounce back, and I eat too much, and then I diet, it's not good for my health. Better is to, if I'm overweight, lose weight, and then to eat properly, to exercise properly, to make sure that I stay healthy, and to keep at that level of weight which is good for me. The same for a risky project. We need to de-risk the project in the short term, and then we need to take longer term action to change our risk-taking behavior.
How do we stay risk healthy on our projects? What is the longer term action?
Well, there's longer term action in relation to weight loss, if we like, to risk obesity.
Yes.
Because if we said that risk obesity results from uncontrolled risk appetite, taking on more risk than you should, then that's the immediate longer term problem to tackle for this specific problem of risk obesity. So that means I need to understand my risk appetite, and where it's inappropriate, I need to moderate it. Because, if you just ate every nice piece of food that you saw in front of you, you will very quickly be overweight. If I took every risk I saw without considering it, just because my appetite was to take risk, very quickly my project will be overexposed. So we have to understand that some people like to take risk, some people don't like to take risk. We might call them risk-seeking and risk-averse. But sometimes that natural urge to take or not take risk is inappropriate. So we need to moderate our natural gut instinct for taking risk and to do something intelligently to counter it. And this is where we need to choose a different risk attitude. So if my risk appetite is to be very risk-seeking, and I see that's taking me into trouble, then I, as a risk attitude, could choose to be more risk-averse. And then that would help me to not fulfill my appetite just blindly, but to take the right level of risk. So longer term, it's about understanding I'm a risk-taking person. That sometimes leads me into trouble. I better be careful. Or I'm a very cautious person, and sometimes that leads me to miss opportunities, and I need to just step out of the box a little bit more and be a bit more adventurous. So that's the longer term solution for the risk obesity issue. In terms of risk health, the World Health Organization said that health is not the absence of disease. Health is complete well-being, physical, mental, social, and spiritual. And it's the same with risk management, that risk health is not just removing some of your risk problems in the way that you manage risk. It's about a much more mature and robust approach to risk management. And that requires a number of key things. First of all, a supportive culture. a culture that recognizes that projects are risky, but we can do something about it. Secondly, risk leadership in the organization, not just risk management, but people at leadership level who champion the risk cause and say, we need to be doing this. Thirdly, we need to improve and enhance our capability, be growing, not just staying where we used to do it well 10 years ago, but enhancing our risk management approach and making sure that we maintain that forward momentum and ensuring that we learn from the past. So I think those kind of characteristics are what I mean by being healthy, culture, leadership, growing, momentum and learning. And that will, I think, reflect a more mature approach to risk management and protect us from those kind of problems like risk obesity.
Mm-hmm. Your presentation was yesterday, right?
Yes, it was.
Was it a success from your perspective? Did you enjoy it?
I always enjoy these presentations at Congress. That's why I keep coming back, yes. So
All right.
Thank you.
So at the end of the presentation, when people got up and left, what was the one thing that you really hoped that your attendees yesterday and our listeners today would take with them out of the room and out of the end of our podcast interview here today?
I think I'd like people to think about the level of risk exposure on their projects in a holistic way, to understand that there is a level of risk on a project which is too much, which is more risk than we can cope with, but also to understand that if your project is too risky, you could do something about it. You can take short-term measures through the risk management process to de-risk the project now, but you also need to think more widely about my risk-taking preferences and the risk-taking preferences of the organisation, and to see whether those things need to be moderated in the longer term to stop this problem happening again in future. So you might be overweight, but you can do something about it and keep that weight off and be healthy.
All right, David, thank you so much for your time again today.
It's been a pleasure as always. I'll see you next time.
Very likely in San Diego.
And then Barcelona before that, I think.
Maybe.
Yes, I'll see you in San Diego.
All right, thank you.